This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. A cattle market update with livestock economist Elliott Dennis from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln begins today's show. He discusses cattle on feed as well as the continued impact of HPAI on the cattle market. Sarah Lancaster, K-State weed specialist, continues the show as she talks about recent articles that share information on pre-emergence herbicides for soybeans and herbicide movement because of wind. Today's show ends with Brianna Jacobus from the Kansas Foundation for Agriculture in the Classroom as she explains a project that people can do to celebrate Earth Day. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update. And this week we're joined by University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. Elliott, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Elliott, starting off our cattle conversation with beef trim, and beef trim's looking pretty high for right now.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with where we're at in cattle weights. We are definitely breaking from the seasonal trend. Normally we'd see cattle weights start to go down. We really maintained and plateaued cattle weights, and it's essentially what that happens is we get beef trims from three different markets. We get it from the dairy cow market, we get it from the fed steer and heifer, and we get it from imports. And so what that's is putting more value on there, or at least more product on the market. But even with that product that's coming on the market with heavier weights, that trim value, at least at the 90% value, is extremely high. To give an example, in 2022, we were at about $280 a hundredweight for the 90% lean trimmings. Pretty much from the beginning of January, we have seen, we started at about $250, and right now we're almost at $350 a hundredweight. So, and it's continuing to go up. Now, the caveat to that is it tends to fall pretty closely with the utility cow price, and we can, even in the cutter cow price as well, we have seen a little bit of break in that market. And so that we're paying for a little bit less of that. We can potentially see those prices come down for cows, but definitely still incentives out there to try to kill cows. Now, one of those things that's going on in the market that has the strong potential to add a lot of cull cows to the market, and that's this high path avian influenza in the dairy herds. Right now, they're selectively culling dairy cows that they believe, or they're even just treating them on site. A lot of variation that's going on. This is a deviation from what they had done in the past with high path avian influenza in poultry farms. If you remember, happened last year when these outbreaks started to happen. They came in and they basically just depopulated the entire barns. So a little bit deviation there, but if we do see some more culling on the dairy herd, that's going to put volume onto the trim market and cause those prices to come down. But just recognizing that trim is a major component. A lot of people eat ground beef. We're going into the grilling season. People like hamburgers. And so there at least is some pressure to maintain volume.
And Elliott, this past Friday, the Cattle on Feed report came out, and wanting to make a mention of some numbers you saw there.
Yeah, so really no major surprises there, at least in Nebraska. We are about 100% of where we were at in the past. When we're thinking about kind of where we're at, kind of moving forward, we're showing a lot more heifers on feed here in Nebraska, about 10 to 15,000 more, same number of steers. And I think that just continues to indicate that as long as we're continuing to place more heifers, that there's not a strong desire to continue to retain those and at least have a serious aggression to rebuild the herd. We have seen some changes in the weights that, at least in Nebraska, what we've seen is a little bit more on the middle weights, heavier weights. We've kind of shied away from a little bit, down 3 or 4%. And so for us, we're thinking about where those cattle are going to come out at and where their weights are at. Just lines us up a little bit. And just particularly given where we're at and the number of cows steers and heifers that we've had on feed, we have a lot of front end supply that we're going to have to work through. And that really kind of leads to kind of where we're at in the markets and kind of circling back to high path of will the market be able to recover? And if the futures market will come up to meet the cash.
And Elliott, really any reason why you're seeing more middleweight cattle and less heavyweights?
A lot of that has to do with kind of lining up the cattle where they're going to be harvested and just feed yards just being generally full as we start to work through this busy time of the year. This April, May, June is big time for us. And really that's where a lot of the premium markets tend to be in preparation for the summer grilling season.
And speaking of that market, what is live cattle market pricing doing right now as June's coming in and April's exiting?
Yep. So June market is, of course, we were up in the 180s prior to these news releases. We've really come down to that really 173, 175. Tends to be quite a bit of resistance. Market will react to the cattle on feed report, but given that it was relatively neutral, that we shouldn't have extreme movements there. But my personal feeling, as I've talked to producers, as I've kind of read different commentary, is really that we have to learn more about what's going high path and how this is going to be managed. I think there is some concern since it is bird spread and even some of the bird species that they're saying that we need to be aware of. Those are very frequently spotted in feed yards. And so if we're going to have the potential to spread, is it just going to stay in dairies? As I've talked with people at USDA, APHIS, and Fort Collins, a lot of their questions have more been, is it going to be on steers and heifers, or is it going to be in beef cows in general? If it stays just to beef cows, that spread is less likely, just given the way that it's currently manifesting itself in milk.
Elliott, you mentioned beef cattle, and as we're thinking about summer grazing, how could that impact everything?
Yeah, it's one of the big reasons why we think some of that spread is happening in dairy cattle is that there's just a lot of close proximity and also equipment potentially not being cleaned properly, desanitized or frequently enough. So when you think about the beef cow, it doesn't look like those conditions will hold. That's the first thing. But really related to the dairy industry in Nebraska, at least, and in surrounding states, Nebraska does do a lot of heifer development for dairies. And when we think about, they're on corn stalks, they're on other sorts of feeds throughout the winter. And so what really happens is if we're unable to move those cattle because of stop movements and a lot of worry about bringing in new dairy cattle in, that could have the potential to back us up a little bit. But that being said, I mean, the Nebraska dairy industry tends to be relatively minor. It's more about, what's the availability on that grass moving forward.
And as we're thinking about getting those cattle fed, planting some of those crops right now that could be really important to cattle, and how could what's being planted really impact that market?
Yeah, so when we think about where we're at on corn plantings, that's just getting underway, and 3 to 5% of that corn is being planted. Really depends on the area, on what's getting planted. But really the big news there is, if we're, in pretty favorable feedstuff conditions, that really supports us being able to hold on cattle a little bit longer than we would have liked to fatten them up. But, as we really have more soybeans that really come to harvest and more acreage that goes to that, then we can start to see a little bit pressure on those prices. I think long-term, the industry needs to consider some of the things that we've been talking about has really been around this sustainable aviation fuel and this move for biofuels. The real push there is for soybeans to be planted and to basically be processed. And so particularly in Nebraska, in the southeast or northeast Nebraska, we tend to plant a lot of corn. It tends to either go to high moisture corn. And so if we're eliminating acres to plant soybeans, that's going to have impacts on basis for corn and also just the closeout profitability for feeding. So I think that's not something that's going to impact us in the short run. But as we start to think about strategically, where does this position us and what do we need to be prepared? That's something that's not going away, sustainable aviation fuel and also this renewable energy fuel. and how that affects the crops that we use and feed to put on weight efficiently is going to be something we're going to have to deal with in the coming years.
Elliott, you've mentioned a few USDA reports that we've talked through today, and just wanting to make another mention about the cattle inventory report that won't be coming out in the middle of this year.
Yeah, I think it's really important to know that we use a lot of these reports to generate forecasts, particularly that the cattle inventory report that comes out in July. Big number that comes out of is the cow-calf crop. That cow-calf crop may seem minor, but when we talk about stocking intensity or stocking density, we need that type of number in order to calculate that. And particularly some of the stuff that I've put out is we really look at this by state. It allows us to see inflows, outflows. That's just one of many reports that USDA is thinking about discontinuing. Now, that being said, I fully appreciate and understand the need to get rid of reports and to be more cost conscious. Just need to be cognizant of the reports that we're doing and just make USDA aware of if we get rid of certain reports, we can't do certain types of analysis, and that has the potential to affect the industry. And so just being aware of what those reports are, and if those reports are of value or people that you work with use those reports, just to make USDA and NASS aware of that so that we can continue to provide good analysis and research to make the best business decisions that we can.
Elliott, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us our cattle market update.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Shelby.
That was University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Tuesday show talking about recent agronomy eUpdate articles mentioning herbicides and weeds. And then to talk about it, we're joined by K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster. Sarah, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Shelby. Thanks for the invitation.
Sarah, first mentioning the Agronomy eUpdate article titled Pre-Emergence Herbicides for Soybeans. And when we're talking about this, really a recipe for soybeans.
So yeah, Shelby, I like to keep things simple. And so I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to think about kind of broad recommendations for our folks. And so for soybeans, the kind of basic recipe is a Group 15 herbicide. That applies for pretty much all of our summer crops. So Group 15 herbicides would be things like S-metolachlor or products like Dual, acetochlor, products like Warrant or Harness, dimethenamide or products like Outlook and Verdict, or pyroxasulfone, which would be products like Zidua or Anthem. So those are the main Group 15 herbicides that we use in our summer crops. So one of those really serves as a foundation to control grassy weeds and also to provide a good portion of our pigweed control. But they're not going to carry the load by themselves for palm amaranth and water hemp. And so that's where some of the other additions start to really come in as we think about stacking up to get the maximum control possible, combining products to get activation in a wide range of environments, and then also just that good recommendation to apply multiple effective herbicide modes of action for herbicide resistance management. So those are kind of the three guidelines for how we add on to that Group 15 herbicide base for soybeans.
And something else producers might want to think about adding on, Group 14 herbicides.
Right. So that's where I would go next. So we talked about 15s as a base. The Group 14s that we use pre-emergence would probably be the next logical step. So those would be products like flumioxazin or Valor. Would be a very common one that we use that has performed well in our herbicide evaluation trials here at Ashland Bottoms. Another option would be sulfentrazone. So that would be products like the Authority line of products or Spartan would be examples of products that contain sulfentrazone. So to Group 14 herbicides, sometimes folks are resistant to maybe use the maximum labeled rates for those products because of concerns about herbicide injury. A lot of that injury is cosmetic and the plants are going to outgrow it. Where we have to be really concerned with injury from Group 14 herbicides is if we get a rain shortly after planting an application. If we have splash on those newly emerging cotyledons, or if the herbicide gets down into the furrow as those seeds are germinating, we can see some significant crop injury. But by and large, there's some data out of Purdue that suggests that that crop injury is largely cosmetic.
And for this pre-emergence herbicide recipe for soybeans, also wanting to look at metribuzin?
So yeah, metribuzin is to me, one of the better third choices that we have if your focus is Palmer amaranth and water hemp. So metribuzin is a group 5 herbicide that is the same group of herbicides as atrazine, right? So we rely on atrazine a lot in our corn and grain sorghum. Metribuzin would sort of be the cousin to that we can use in soybeans. We've been doing a lot of work, we being extension weed scientists from around the kind of the corn belt, have been doing some work looking at really what is the ideal rate of metribuzin, because again, there's been some history of really sensitive soybean varieties and some unpalatable crop injury in the past. But a couple of things are going on, namely being that seed companies have developed soybean varieties that are much more tolerant to metribuzin now. And so it's much less of a concern. So our work as a group has been looking at trying to figure out how high can we push that metribuzin rate to keep supporting our group 14 and group 15 herbicides.
And then one last thing people might want to add to this recipe, group 2 herbicides.
Yep. So when we talk about group 2 herbicides, I usually think about those if we're going after some specific broadleaf weeds. So, by and large, our driver weeds across the state are the pigweeds. And so we don't talk about those ALS inhibiting herbicides much because of the resistance to group 2 herbicides in the pigweeds. But they can be very useful if you're trying to control things like cockleburr or velvet leaf or common sunflower.
And while it's not a herbicide, something to think about when it comes to weeds and soybeans, how wide that row spacing is.
Yeah, so soybeans are an amazing crop, Shelby, and how they adjust for row spacing and plant population and all of that intra-specific competition. From a weed management perspective, anything we can do to get the soybean canopy to close faster is good for weed control. And so, to plant in 15, 10, 7.5 inch rows is a good thing from a weed control perspective. I know that, you're going to talk to Ignacio at some point in the future, and he'll give some more insights on the agronomic and the yield implications of some of that. But yeah, from a weed management perspective, Shelby, we like to support our herbicides with agronomic practices like narrow row spacings that, they may not always in the plot result in statistically greater weed control, but when you think about taking that to the field, it is beneficial.
And as we're talking about herbicides, another agronomy eUpdate article you wrote is titled Off-Target Movement of Herbicides with Wind Erosion. And why is this something that really producers and growers want to keep in mind?
Yeah, so this is one of those sort of unusual questions that honestly has come up multiple times in the spring since I've started here at K-State, right? So we live in Kansas. The winds come sweeping across the plains, right? And one of the questions that I get is, what happened to all of that pre-emergence herbicide that I put out 2 weeks ago or whenever before that windstorm came through? And there's not a ton of research that has gone back and really tried to quantify how much herbicide is left in the field. A lot of the research that's been done in this area, Shelby, is aimed at reducing off-target movement from an environmental perspective, right? We don't want herbicides in surface water, et cetera, et cetera. But what we can take from that body of literature is that, yeah, we do lose herbicides, right? Because the molecules of herbicide are going to be adsorbed or attached to the soil particles. And so where the soil goes, so goes the herbicide. The question that I don't have a good answer for our folks is, how much should we actually lose? And how do I know if I lost enough herbicide that I'm going to have to, change my weed management program? That would be a very case-by-case sort of situation. But the thing I would say is that, folks that have been experiencing these high winds and, there's been lots of conversation about dust and blowing dirt and things like that in the last few weeks. So it does probably mean that if you had that early spring residual on, you might want to think about kind of stepping up your at-planting residual program because there's a good probability that you're not going to get as much activity out of that earlier application.
So really keeping an eye on the fields and remembering that your herbicides might be working, but they may have just also blown away in the wind.
That's right. I mean, you're not going to lose it all, but it definitely is going to have an impact.
Wanting to mention one more article that was in the April 11th Agronomy eUpdate, and this article involves a deck of cards.
Yeah, so this is kind of a fun project, and I have to give credit where credit is due. Franny Miller approached me about wanting to do this project, and so she and her team have been a great help in getting this project done. But yeah, it's just, a fun way to think about weed identification. So what we did is we kind of divided up the suits into different life stages. So for example, hearts are seeds, clubs are mature plants. And then we took the different kind of face values, right? So ace, king, queen, all the way, and we assigned different weed species to those. And so it's just a fun way to, help folks learn weed ID potentially, and just to kind of promote awareness about, what do these weeds do to our crops? How do we control these weeds?
And as we talk about all these herbicides and all these weeds, what's a great resource where people can always find out more information?
Yeah, Shelby. So, we always post things in the eUpdate, as you mentioned. And as always, we have the chemical weed control guide that we update every year. So folks are encouraged to check that out for specific information about any of the products we've mentioned today.
Sarah, I appreciate you taking the time to join us and talk us through a few of your articles.
Thanks, Shelby.
That was K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster. The articles that we talked about today are from the April 11th Agronomy eUpdate. You can find these articles in today's show notes on agtoday.net, or you can also find them by going to eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. Again, that is eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu, and find the April 11th eUpdate, and you'll find all the information you're looking for there. You can also get signed up to receive this weekly e-newsletter on that website. The articles that we talked about in today's show are titled Pre-Emergence Herbicides for Soybeans, Off-Target Movement of Herbicides with Wind Erosion, and Integrated Pest Management, new resource to help identify weeds in Kansas, which I'd like to tell you a little bit more about that deck of cards. Each card suit in the deck visually represents the seed, seedling, flower, and mature plant for each featured weed common in Kansas agriculture production. The booklet provides a description of each weed featured in the card deck. Card decks cost $10 each and may be ordered online by following the link in this eUpdate article. Select IPM card decks, then weed identification card deck, and fill out the requested information. Card decks are available while they last. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show with the Assistant Director of the Foundation for Agriculture in the Classroom, Brianna Jacobus. Brianna, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Happy to be here.
Brianna, on April 22nd, it is Earth Day, and so wanting to first think about an activity that people could be doing on Earth Day to celebrate, or even anytime during the year.
Yes, so recently we launched a new series of lessons for K through 12th grades. There's a lesson for each kind of age group there, centered around the earth and how much of the earth we can actually grow the food that we eat on.
And the activity for us to talk about today is the Apple Earth Play-Doh activity.
Yeah, so we got a little creative with our Apple Earth is a very well-known lesson plan throughout Ag in the Classroom nationwide. So we decided to put a little Kansas spin on it and make it a little bit more hands-on for students. So we have an activity in our soil value lesson where students get to follow along with the teacher and cut up a ball of Play-Doh that represents the planet Earth.
So something that people can be doing maybe in school to learn a little bit about Earth and a tiny bit of agriculture there, but also something that could be done at home?
100%. It's a very easy 10-minute activity that anyone really K through 12 can do. When we do the activity, we use either plastic knives or you can even use pencils to cut the Play-Doh apart. And at the end, students kind of learn how much of the earth is water, how much of the earth people live on. And at the end, the agriculture bit we love is how much of the earth that farmers can actually use to grow the food, fiber, and fuel we use every day.
And the Kansas Foundation for Ag in the Classroom does have some kits available to participants.
Yes, so along with this, we just launched a new initiative with educational service centers where teachers can check out a 2-foot apple model that goes along with the Play-Doh activity, where they can kind of show as they go along with this large apple.
And where are those service centers, or what are those service centers?
Those educational service centers are located across the state. There's 8 different educational service centers. Most schools belong to one of those service centers. So if you aren't sure where your closest one is, your principal or secretary should be able to get you that information.
And Brianna, as we get a little bit closer to summer and having kids spend likely more time at home, there are plenty of other activities that parents could also do with their children.
Yeah, so we love to point parents and volunteers alike to our volunteer guide on our website. Our volunteer guide is free for anyone to download, and it has tons of free activities for students, parents, volunteers to do to learn a little bit more about agriculture.
As we are thinking about teachers, which something really important to the Kansas Foundation for Agriculture in the Classroom, a week of celebration for teachers is coming up.
Yes, one of our favorite weeks of the year is Teacher Appreciation Week, and we love to make sure that teachers know just how special they are to us. So during the week of May 6th through May 10th, KFAC will be doing giveaways on our social media. So make sure if you're an educator or if you just want to support an educator in your life, to be following us on social media and take advantage of those teacher giveaways.
And is social media also a great place to look for finding more information about the Apple Earth Play-Doh activity?
Yes, we will be posting more about that Play-Doh activity on Earth Day. So today, make sure you check out our social media to learn more about that.
What social media are you guys on, and how can they find you there?
Yes, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at KSAG Classroom.
Brianna, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about activities that could be done for Earth Day, but also just to learn more about agriculture.
Thanks for having me.
That was the Assistant Director of the Kansas Foundation for Agriculture in the Classroom, Brianna Jacobus. If you'd like to learn more about the Apple Earth Play-Doh activity, you can do so by going to their social media or their website at ksagclassroom.org. I will link that in today's show notes, which, as always, you can find on agtoday.net. And I would like to say to our listeners, Happy Earth Day, and thank you for everything you do for our planet. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.